Good afternoon, everyone. This is Elliot Meyer, the Communications Coordinator for Wisconsin Land & Water. I am so pleased to welcome everyone to the first breakout session of our very first virtual County Conservationist meeting. And before I give the introduction to our presenters, I first want to give a big thank you to Extension for their time and technical support. I also wanted to say that none of this would have been possible without the hard work of our colleague, Christina Anderson, who worked tirelessly over the past 2 weeks to make this county conservation meeting happen virtually. So thank you both so very much. Now, as Dan mentioned, this is the main breakout room, and this session is local strategies for climate change. Today, we are pleased to have Katie Abbott from Iowa County, Ken Dolata from Oconto County, and Kirk Calkins from Columbia County share with us how they are responding to catastrophic events due to climate change. Katie is the County Conservationist for Iowa County Land Conservation Department. She earned her Bachelor's of Science in Biology with a minor in Environmental Science from UW-Eau Claire and a Master's of Science in Conservation Biology from the University of Minnesota. She has worked with conservation on private lands in Southwest Wisconsin for about 13 years, previously in nonprofit positions. Ken Dolata has worked with Oconto County for 30 years and now serves as the County Conservationist. He also serves on the board of directors for Wisconsin Land & Water and is the coordinator for the Lake Michigan Area Association. Kirk Calkins has been working for the County Conservation Department for the last 28 years, spending time in Buffalo County and Calumet County, and since 2001 has been the director of Columbia County's Land and Water Conservation Department. So Katie, Kirk, and Ken, please go ahead and unmute yourselves if you haven't already. And as you present, make sure you say next slide, and I will advance the slide forward. I will be giving a 5-minute notice at the end so we can wrap up and have time for questions. And as a reminder to the audience, please send all your questions today through the chat box. So without further ado, I will turn the presentation over to them. Katie, take it away.
Thank you. I was asked to help out with this just a couple days ago, so I'm sorry if I don't have a ton prepared, but Iowa County has been fortunate. We didn't get the catastrophic flooding that Monroe and Vernon counties had a couple years ago. So all of our dams are still intact, happily. We do have 11 of those county dams, but we're still seeing, definitely damage and flooding, and this is something that we need to start addressing for sure. It's past time to start addressing. So we've done. Kind of starting small, I guess I would say. We don't have, a huge task force. We don't have a big work group going on countywide or anything like that. So this is sort of an example of how we've started sort of internally on the staff level to really start thinking about climate change and how to incorporate that into what we do. So next slide. This is just for people that don't know where we're located. We're in the southwest part of the state. We're in the driftless area, the unglaciated part of the state. So as is Monroe and Vernon County and some of these other counties that have had a lot of issues lately, we have very steep topography, a lot of dissected landscape, a lot of streams, and so we can get very flashy flood events. So things come really fast and powerful and can do a lot of damage in a short time. Next slide. This is just a couple of pictures I could pull up of some of the issues we've had. Definitely, soil erosion, and that then in turn impacts our infrastructure, our road, ditches, and culverts. And you can see some of the issues that highway department has had to deal with their culverts, either washing out or getting clogged with debris. Next slide. So when I started in 2017, our land and water plan had already been done. And over the next year, we had all new staff. We have 4 staff in our department. And so I really wanted to kind of come together as a staff and do a little bit of strategic planning so that we're all on the same page and we understand what we're doing and why. And climate change definitely came out of that process as one of our top issues. So this was something we just, again, did with staff. I didn't incorporate the committee at this point. So we looked at our stakeholders, a typical strategic planning kind of mini process over a couple of days, looking at the outcomes, the impacts that we want to see, both long, short, and medium term, what are we trying to get to? What's our ultimate end goal here? And looking at then, once we have our goals, what are the activities that we want to try to utilize to get to those goals? What kind of resources do we need to have in place? So some of our ideal conditions, ideally in a perfect world, right? Well, in a perfect world, there would be climate change, but ideally during heavy rain, our soils would stay in place, manure would stay in place. We wouldn't have huge inputs of nutrients to our waters. Our infrastructure would hold, so our dams would hold without having significant damage. Our culverts and our roads would stay intact. So those are kind of sort of the long-term ideal conditions that we'd like to get towards. And then there's a lot of steps along the way, obviously, to get to that point. And we really focused more of our planning on the adaptation strategies on farmland. So we weren't really looking at energy use or not even necessarily carbon sequestration, although, if there became a program for paying farmers for carbon sequestration, we try to definitely promote that and take advantage of that. But mostly we're looking at, what we could do from our small department was really try to do more outreach and facilitation of farmers to adopt practices that would maximize water infiltration, implement soil health practices, and put into place practices that would kind of try to deal with some of this increased rainfall, try to reduce the runoff and reduce the damage from those issues. And then we looked at, participants that need to be involved, partners, stakeholders, things like that. So next slide. So just an example of some of the short-term activities, really trying to incorporate different messaging into our outreach programs, trying to speak in a way that hopefully the farmer would be more engaged with. So my committee and my community tends to be a little more conservative. So we probably aren't going to use that climate change term too often, too boldly. I know other counties disagree with that approach. So it's really kind of up to what you feel like would work in your county. But we definitely I've heard farmers say, oh, I'm not going to use the climate change word, but something's changing, so they can see something's different. And so talking about the impacts to them and how we can help them solve these issues might be just a more engaging way to approach the issue. So we're talking more about, protecting their soil, protecting their yields, protecting infrastructure, saving taxpayer money by protecting infrastructure, things like that might resonate a little bit better with my committee and my board and my community. We've implemented a new newsletter with trying to make it really visual and attractive. So we use that for a lot of different outreach. We did purchase a rainfall simulator, which a lot of other counties have been using as well, to really show what happens. People get a really nice visual demonstration of what happens with these heavy rains. And also using our partnership network. So we recognize we can't do everything in our department. So where can we work with other partners to get more accomplished, either through outreach or pulling in more funding to the area, working with a farmer-led group and things like that. I do feel like some of our next steps that we haven't done yet include, we just need more analysis of where are the most vulnerable areas in our county, which farms and fields do we tackle first, what are the most critical areas to start working. We've still kind of been a little more of the shotgun conservation approach. Our cost sharing tends to be people who are asking for our money rather than us always going out to promote, in a particular watershed. So we're starting to look at being more targeted and using climate change as one of the frames where we would try to target where we're working. So again, kind of small steps. Again, not a huge countywide push, not an official task force or anything, but I think this sort of internal model could work for some counties that maybe aren't ready to take a full-fledged climate change task force approach. So that's all I have.
All right, this is Ken Dolata. It's interesting going after Katie to see how far Iowa counties advanced, because in Oconto County, they're not talking climate change at all. So just kind of interesting to go after. Next slide, please. Just to highlight where Oconto County is, opposite corner from Katy, in that we don't have the steep valleys and draws and stuff where most of our cropland and stuff is pretty flat. We got 38,000 population, so we're do not have a lot of resources and stuff. We have 375 lakes, about 1,000 miles of stream, and we've got 25 miles of shore on Lake Michigan. Next slide, please. Everything you hear, you know, whether it's nutrient management or soil erosion, all that, slope is, you know, one of the big contributing factors, with obviously other factors in it. But in Oconto County, if we have a 10-foot rise in elevation, we call that a ridge in our cropland. As you can see, this is an A-slope field, but you can still see damage that happens, and it's just the rainfall intensity and stuff. Next slide, please. Here's two erosion gullies, I guess you can call them. I don't even know what you call them that. One's about 1,600 feet long, one's about 1,800 feet long. Next slide. The severity of these has just been getting worse and worse. Like they said, I've been in Oconto County for 30 years. If we've seen one of these, maybe not even this bad, every 10 years, it was a rare occasion. Now we're starting to see these every year, and multiple of them from different areas in the county, soil types and everything else. Seems like what are 1 to 2 inch rains are now 3 to 5 inch rains, and they're coming in a short period of time. Next slide, please. That last slide with the gullies in there, and that we just estimated just out of them gullies, approximately 2,000 ton of soil loss. And you know, we work on all this stuff on the cropland and everything else, and you see how much you save every year, and then you lose that in 4 or 5 hours. Really is demoralizing. Makes you feel you're going backwards on the progress you made over the last couple of years. This is just a slide showing the mouth of the Pensacola River after a rainfall event out into the bay, and you can you know, you can just see the sediment that's being discharged out there. So next slide, please. The mouth of the Oconto River, we have a yacht manufacturer there and a couple marinas and stuff. They dredge the mouth of that river maybe every 15 plus years to allow their large boats to get out there. They dredged it, I believe it was 2 years later, maybe the 3rd year after. We had a series of very intense storms in the spring. It basically plugged the whole mouth of the river up 1/4 to a 1/2 mile, where they could not get their boats out. If you had a 16-foot fishing boat and you knew where you were going, you could just make it out. So this is all the sediment. You don't see it all, but basically had to get an emergency permit to dredge, and that just so that manufacturer and the marinas could get their boats out. So next slide. We have 125 miles of funded ATV trails. And the only reason I threw this in there, you see, is up until the last 3-4 years, we hardly ever worked on these trails and stuff. There weren't issues, but now we're getting 2 to 3 to 4 of these a year that we're working with our Parks and Rec department on taking care of these erosion problems on the trails. Next slide, please. So what Oconto County's been looking at is, besides all our normal cropping practices and everything else, when possible, we're trying to take, instead of the 2, 5, 10 year standard storm event, the storm events that are in the standards that you designed to, we're trying to jump some of them up as high as 50-year storm events. Some of the challenges with that, we got to look at each site. One of the main things is, what are you protecting? Maybe it ain't, I don't want to say it ain't worth protecting, but it might not. It's a small little waterway that's eroding and going into a closed depression or something. You might not want to take and spend the extra money on it for that. But some of these culverts and infrastructure that it's actually threatening, then we try to push it and get it bigger and better, I guess, if you want to call it. And some of the landowners don't want to put the extra cost into it. They don't feel it's an issue because it happened one time. But we are seeing more and more of these landowners are seeing it, and they are more than willing to upgrade the design. Then the other thing is that we've been seeing over the last probably 5 years is we've been starting to design most of the culverts for our townships and county highway departments. This is after failures and stuff. The old mentality that we see in a lot of the townships was if there's a 30-inch pipe in there and it washes out, just throw another 30-inch pipe back in. So we're designing them with higher capacities. And another big thing we see is they weren't always installed properly in that. And sometimes the failure was just due to installation and stuff. Next slide. So the next thing we see with all this rainfall intensity, I guess you want to say, high surface water levels. In 2018, we set a record for, broke the record for the highest precipitation year, beat the normal by 10 inches. And then in 2019, we broke the record again, and we were 20 plus inches above normal. And as I mentioned before, we got that 25 miles of shoreline on the Bay of Green Bay, and you know where everyone has to build next to the water. And as you can see, some of the issues with that. And as I stated, along the bay shore on our side, it's fairly flat. So it doesn't take the water to come up much to start really flooding back farther. Next slide, please. So what we see there is right now the water's up high, and if you want to call it, we get a 15 to 20 mile an hour easterly wind. Within an hour, it'll push water in up to 18 inches higher. I don't know if you call it a tidal surge or what do you call it on the Great Lakes. So we're seeing this with an east wind, it's pushing it back. The windier it is, the longer the duration of the wind, the farther back it's pushing. In some areas, it's pushing it back a mile. The longer it is, like I say, the more water in there, also the longer the time it takes for it to recede once the wind switches the other direction. Next slide, please. So getting to be a common sight on Bay is homes with sandbags around and pumps inside, pumping out. As you can see here, this one's dry right now, but all it takes is an east wind and all of a sudden this thing's surrounded by water within an hour. Next slide, please. So as they're saying with the high record highs and stuff, Lake Michigan finally hit a record high this year, which isn't necessarily good. So what we're seeing is a lot of shoreline erosion. The Wisconsin DNR started an emergency authorization permit. So we take and help the landowners with that, and they basically got to sign a form, send it in, and they can place riprap immediately without sending a design in or anything to DNR. So we help them with the basic designs of it and stuff. Because once they're done, they do have to file a Chapter 30 permit, and then it has to meet the Chapter 30 design. And that's probably our biggest thing, is helping the landowners with the Chapter 30 permit, because anybody that's worked on the DNR's website through the permitting process, probably 95% of landowners can't get through it. And then with the flooding or emergency management, they've been working on a lot of stuff. They got some sections that when they get the big east winds, they look at evacuating people out of there, which has been done several times already. There's a county road and a couple town roads that are permanently closed till the water recedes, just because they're impassable when this wind comes and they can't get, you know, whether the rescue squad, fire, or anything else into these houses, they can't get them in there. And what this is causing with some of the roads washing out, it isn't just a washout, but as this tidal surge comes in a half mile inland, all of a sudden you have a foot of water washing over the road going one direction. Well, then a day later it's going the other direction, or coming back out. So you got both sides of the road that are both upstream and both downstream. And we're seeing where it's washing shoulders out, and then it starts undermining the blacktop and causing some issues there. Our county with their emergency management stuff, they did fill over 10,000 sandbags that they're selling to the landowners for, I think, $1.50 a bag. You know, it's a reasonable price. Plus they have empty ones. So them have been in high demand, I guess you want to call it. Then to talk about our inland lake levels, we have 5 gauging stations throughout the county. And in the last 4 years, a lot of these lakes are up almost 3.5 feet. So what this has caused was shoreline erosion. On our high recreation lakes, a lot of them already had a lot of riprap and stuff around them from wave action and from boating traffic, which is one of the big ones. And then also ice shoves are a huge thing that are happening on our lakes. Now with the water level being up 3.5 feet, the ordinary high water mark's down 2 feet, 3 feet. All this stuff is hitting virgin soil, if you want to call it, where water's never hit before, and it's causing some pretty serious problems. Some of the challenges we got with that, our zoning department adopted the NR 115 shoreline rules. Well, that pertains to anything within 75 feet of the ordinary high water mark. They cannot place, they're not allowing riprap in there because they consider it like a retaining wall or hard structure. So where NR 115 was there to protect the lakes, now it's almost holding us back from taking care of some of these problems above it. They are working on a case-by-case basis on it, but sandbags, they're saying, and stuff like that. Well, we found that you try putting sandbags in, it works for time being, but as soon as winter comes, the ice and stuff takes them sandbags right out, and it's a big waste of money, personally. But so we're working on it a case-by-case basis, but it's a whole new issue that we've seen that we never thought of. Next slide, please. And then just a couple quick slides here on the last thing is, with all this happening, we're finding groundwater levels are rising incredibly fast. On the southern part of our county, we have a lot of small closed depressions and stuff. In this picture here, you can see this isn't a pond. This is a farmer's hayfield. This one's about, I believe, 7 acres flooded here that you see. You can tell that the neighbor's trees, this has been like this for 2 years now. There's normally not water standing here. It's now about 4 feet deep. It does get, when high rain falls, it will come up over this road, but it also goes up towards the shed that you can see in the right corner there. He started out running a 3-inch pump that he has to pump 700 feet over a hill to try and lower this water to keep it away from his house. That didn't work, so we went up to a 6-inch pump. Well, it takes him about 4 days. He can pump it down and get it pretty much to the bottom. They actually dug a hole down there the one day, made a sump in there. And he felt pretty good about it, but 2 days later, it was right back up to this level here, which is about the standard level, and we don't get rain for any amount of time. We have another subdivision with a closed depression. They've got an 8-inch pump in there. They're running daily, and they can get it down about 2 feet. And they just maintain, if they get a rain, it comes right back up. So, and they're running that one like 2,500 feet to get it out of this closed depression. So we have several of these, and they're getting to be a real challenge. They don't know what to do. We have one that we're actually proposing to drain a wetland, wooded wetland, a 20-acre one. DNR working with them on it, but we're not seriously going to drain it, but it's normally a foot of water in there. Right now there's 5 feet of water in there, and it's up against all these houses in a subdivision. So we're looking at putting potentially a standpipe and 3,000 feet of pipe and directional boring through hills to make a permanent drain there, but at a controlled water level. Next slide, please. And then just one other thing we're seeing is with all this water level coming up, this is just a town road that we didn't have a washout on it, but water is actually seeping underneath the road through a sand lens, I believe it was, or whatever. And it started collapsing shoulders of the road. And we're seeing this around several different areas of the county, and we expect to see more. And obviously they're a hazard and whatnot, but in our county, we don't have a strategy we're going to or anything as far as on paper, but we are seeing our highway department, the towns, other areas that they seem like they're believers in it, I guess, put it that way. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Want me to get going then? All right. So I'm Kurt Calkins, and I was asked I was brought out of not even the bullpen. I think I was brought up from a minor league team and put on a bus, and they waited for me. So I got asked to kind of help fill in here late yesterday. And when Matt and I were talking, I decided to kind of take a little different approach. You've seen lots of the kind of the picturesque representation of what we're all starting to deal with climate change. For me, the timing, what I'm going to try to talk to you here for the next 10 minutes about is kind of how we just completed our Land and Water Plan revision. So our 10-year revision, we just completed it in June. And kind of how the process played out is pretty interesting, and maybe some other counties will kind of learn from that. Like, it was mentioned that Iowa County is a fairly conservative county. If you think of Columbia County, even though we're very close to Madison, and if you look at like a political map, we're kind of a blue-red county. We're split pretty much right down the middle, but our county board and our leadership tends to be pretty conservative, and committee membership tends to be pretty conservative, and agricultural representation is pretty conservative. So knowing that, going into the conversation, we didn't plant a conversation about climate change or climate change resiliency. Internally as staff, we kind of had our wish list of things that we thought were important enough to be included in this revision. But again, we let the process play out, and I'm just going to kind of tell you how that played out. So go ahead, Elliot, next slide. So I just threw this in here, and you're not going to see any fancy pictures, but this kind of just shows you a representation of our Citizen Advisory Committee. Obviously, we did our best to populate our committee with good representation. If I had to pick from this committee, I would say it's probably 75% very conservative membership, and probably the other 25% a little more on that more liberal or democratic side. So I think that's important, because as you're sitting around the table with 75% of the people and saying, what do you think our issues are? What are the big things that we need to consider as we move forward over the next 10 years, thinking about challenges and opportunities? These are the people who led us to this. Go ahead, next one. So this is another little snip from our Land and Water plan. You don't have to read the whole thing, but basically how our Land and Water plan is set up, and I've done several of them here now, and what we've tried to do is, use the nominal group process, build off of and capture any and all resource concerns that people have. And I put this in there, so you'll see, if you open up our plan, you'll see a list of lots of different things that were thrown up on that poster board. And so we like to list them all, because we don't want any of them to fall off, when you kind of get down to, okay, what are our top 5? What are our top 6? They're all issues that people have brought up, and they're valid issues that the committee agrees we should keep in there. So that's what's, kind of important about this, is that if you look at philosophies, or the word philosophies and themes, these are things that that this group of people representing our Citizen Advisory Committee felt were very important. Next slide. So here again, this is an example of, this was not in any numeric order, but under those lists of big picture items that we have, the group chose, they told me to write down climate change resiliency. And then we went through and we started talking about, tell me more about it. And you'll see some of the things that the previous speakers mentioned, but obviously the people interacting with the land, the people working at the town level, interacting with roads, the people in the cities and the urban areas dealing with increasing rainfall events, people from lake districts seeing all these things. These are the people who said, hey, we got rainfall changing, and something's changing. We had the conversation about infrastructure. We've talked about, it's both a subsurface and a surface issue. Columbia County is really a unique and diverse landscape, but one of the things that we're really good at is wetland restoration, because of where we sit with the kind of the convergence of the Fox River and the Wisconsin River. Our landscape is ripe for programs like WRP. So we have very high participation rates in programs like that. And when you look at planned storage capacity in some of those wetlands, and boundaries that we all assumed would exist and kind of be the outer limits of where water would be ponding over a certain period of time, obviously we're seeing dramatic changes in how long water is staying in these wetlands, because obviously they outlet to some surface water boundary, most of them. And when those surface water bodies of water get this flash floodiness, then everything backs up. And so people brought that to light. Surface drainage, obviously things like Ken had shown, we see landowners coming in and talking to us about the necessity for treatments, field scale treatments in areas of concentrated flow that they've never had the necessity to really establish grass waterways, things like that. But in general, that point was, and then we have a lot of drainage districts, and we had drainage districts, representation telling us the same thing, get rid of the water, and where do we put it? So overall, one of the big themes we took away from this conversation was that we need to slow down and do the best we can do to get water to infiltrate where it can infiltrate. That led us to, which I was happy, this was one of the things on my list, was soil health. We have not, up to this point, dove heavily into the soil health dialogue. Obviously, we've been supportive of it, but it really hasn't been institutionalized as kind of a something that we work on here, guides our thinking. So that came up. And there's some conversation there about biofuels and other things. And then also a unique point that was brought up is we are fortunate we have a G-flow model for the county. We have a lot of nitrate issues. We have, some of them are very localized. And in some of the very localized areas, a couple of our headwater watersheds where we have really not areas where you'd think susceptibility to infiltration was high. These are fairly decent silt loam soils. The theory in the groundwater world is that because we're at the headwaters of these groundwater sheds, that we're seeing water hangs out there and is available for infiltration for a long time, and we're getting more vertical driving of the water versus kind of more of a sloped infiltration towards, say, a surface water outlet. And so the more rain we're putting on the landscape, it's driving more of that. So go ahead. So those were the big ticket items. And then in our plan, as you move ahead, we've all done these plans. You get down into kind of what are your priorities? These are the big ticket items that are going to, lead Kurt's decision making over the next 10 years for his department. And this is kind of, and these, we did not ask people to prioritize them, but we asked them to pick the top 6. And so again, I was pleasantly surprised to see climate change resiliency show up there. And now I like the fact that when we went to county board and got this approved, I had a number of questions about it, but to me, we've bypassed or gotten through kind of the political conversation of it, and I think this process helped us do that. Next one. So when you think about long-term action items, so this is just kind of the phrase that we captured. So as we all know, our year-to-year annual work plans, we submit those each year, but I wanted to make sure we included some items in here that we could really go back to and say why we want to do, why are we thinking about this stuff? But you'll see here, and I like this, that we said, hey, we're going to start thinking about climate change and the ideology of it, and we need to really start incorporating it into the way we look at using the tools we have moving forward. And that was another common theme that we did hit on is, we have not yet, one thing that we have done out of this already is we do have our first healthy soil driven producer-led council kind of organizational meeting coming up here in July. So that's good. And this I think is really driving that conversation. So I hope to see more, we'll see. I don't know that we'll create a task force. I think this document will really be more of our tool to guide how we use existing tools. The last thing I'll say is, I think overall, and we all know this as professionals, that besides the massive challenges that the driftless area is charged with controlling some of these dams and doing things like that, we don't have a lot of that. But we think within our landscape, we have a lot of the tools available to us to address this. We just haven't focused on enough on getting people to embrace them. And then the other thing real quickly is this conversation in general, I think, took us over the hump of oftentimes, say way back to the priority watershed programs and all the way on through. This county was very much driven on the fact that someone else is telling us to do this, right? Like oh, the DNR's got a program or DACAP's got a program. And then we've all been on the farm and we've all been on the property where the conversation kind of is almost, we're third party to the conversation, like someone else wants this done. You know, if you're talking watershed management and you're in the Mississippi River Basin and you're talking about hypoxia in Louisiana, it's all they want us to do this for them. And I think this issue is probably the top issue that everyone can understand. It affects us here, and that's what the people are telling us. So that's all I got, Elliot.
All right, thank you, Kurt and Katie and Ken. If you would unmute yourselves, we're gonna go into the question portion. We had 2 questions come in while we were all presenting. The first question is, what are your departments doing to identify areas in your county where upper watershed wetlands, existing or restored, could provide more storage capacity for holding water during storm events? And similarly, are you looking for places where you could reconnect streams and rivers with their floodplains to create more space for the water to spread out where you want it to, instead of having water go where you don't want it to go?
Who wants to go first? Where we've got the water problems in that, we can't even get in there to check wetlands right now because there's so much water. But we take, and I don't want to say we got a priority. We've been kind of looking quasi priority, but we take anything we can get. A lot of landowners don't see it as a valuable thing to them other than hunting maybe and habitat and stuff. But we did get some grant money that we are working on some of these, and it's getting a little more visible in the county. So it is picking up a little bit, but it's a hard sell on a lot of landowners by us.
I was just going to say, you know, if I picked up on all the fine points of the question, but really it comes down to, you know, we have a close relationship with NRCS here, and because of the complexity of, you know, WRP, you know, we've had a lot of those. We've had to spend a lot of time, or they've had to spend a lot of technical time analyzing flood capacity in existing WRPs or wetland restorations. And I think they're looking much closer at that now, because we've got one where we're buying out a house that we never thought we had to buy out, you know, that it never would have been impacted by flood capacity. But overall, you know, have we done anything specifically, you know, as a department? No, but I know we're always, you know, we have conceptualized in the office and wondered what, you know, breaking apart a drainage district in certain areas, you know, there's a lot of flood capacity or flood storage in some of these areas that we're not taking advantage of, but how we would ever orchestrate something like that is hard to do. So.
Yeah, and this is Katie from Iowa County. You know, my department hasn't specifically looked for opportunities for wetland restoration yet. I mean, I'm definitely open to that. I guess I feel like I would need a little more assistance or training on what are the best tools to do that with and what kind of technology we need to do that. And, you know, again, my department specifically has not looked at floodplain reconnection too broadly, mostly because honestly, those are really expensive projects that you don't have funding for. But certainly partners in my area have done that we've collaborated with. So there's interest in the area. And so again, that's another reason to sort of reach out to these partnerships for some of these ideas and projects that might be a little bit bigger than maybe what one department has the funding to do.
One thing I was going to add, Elliot, is as Katie was talking, and maybe Katie remembers it, but other people from the southern area, I remember a little while back at one of our area association meetings, I believe it was in the Rock River, but it was a nonprofit that had come through and done with a grant some GIS analysis of restorable wetlands. I don't know if,
Oh, yeah.
you remember that, Katie?
Yeah, I do. Yep.
Restorable wetlands, and he had, you know, and they had kind of looked at all the ones that nope, because the impacts would be too great off site, and then necked it down to a very, it wasn't as broad of, it was like hypothetically, these are the wetlands we feel could be restored with very minimalistic offsite impacts and impacts to infrastructure. That might be something we can follow up with. Maybe Amy, she might be on here, but maybe she remembers, or we could, because I really left that meeting going, hey, that's a tool that to go to this point of, hey, where are even these opportunities? Because we're probably like you, we do come across once in a while properties that it just works out. We can do a wetland restoration on because you have a willing hook and bullet kind of guy that bought the farm and wants to see more wildlife or something. But if we had the ability to know where those restorable non-combative wetlands were, and we could create an initiative to go engage those landowners, that'd be something that you could put into our toolkit.
All right, thank you. We have the second question that we have is, does anyone have a preferred best management practice for the outfall of a culvert, specifically mentioning elevation drop, increased size, and outflow volume of the culvert?
We need Bob McKeel. That's my answer.
I think you and I are supposed to, aren't we, taking Bob's place? I can't answer
Sure,
that.
Bob. Let
Sorry.
me text Bob real quick. He'll give us an answer. Yeah.
I know up in Oconto County, we usually don't have the big drops and stuff. And like I kind of mentioned in my presentation, is what we've seen a lot of these towns in is they just slam them culverts in. They don't, sink them in 4 inches or whatever. Then they end up with a washout on the end of it. You end up with a plunge pool. Some of these we've been replacing. You take and set it down at 4 to 6 inches and bed it, right? Them plunge pools have filled in on their own. It turns back into a normal stream and stuff. So like I say, just proper placement seem to really help up by us, but we're pretty flat too. So it's a little different.
Okay. The next one was, could you maybe talk in a little bit more depth about some of the things that you have done specifically in the county to address climate change that has resulted in a noticeable difference?
We're still green at it, so we haven't done anything yet.
Yeah, I would just say this. The best success story I can say right now is within a month of getting this indoctrinated in our plan, we have our first producer-led conversation happening in a month, and I think it's going to be driven around this conversation.
Yeah, I think it's a little too soon. I mean, we're just kind of getting started to, definitely with some of our outreach, the newsletter we sent out and our rainfall estimator, we have had farmers then come to us wanting cost sharing for a practice or something like that. So, it's still site by site, and that's just kind of the way we work. So, we've seen improvements on specific sites, but broadly countywide, I don't think it's just too soon. I don't think we've done enough yet to see like a countywide reduction in flooding or anything like really substantial like that. And, that's a very long-term outcome.
Okay. And the last question I have is actually, I'm modifying this question because we've had a couple that are similar, but basically what are some of the tactics that you have used to guide these conversations in your county with individuals or people, whether they be publicly elected officials, landowners and homeowners, or citizen groups or farmer groups that might not believe in climate change or are adverse to the conversation or the notions around climate
change? I don't know if we've ever went out and physically talked climate change to them or put it that way, but we talk to the landowners and stuff when they have these issues happen, and just kind of explain is when they say we've never had this happen here before. And then we tell them, well, we're seeing it on other fields and other places. This stuff is happening. And we're starting to see it multiple times every year and stuff. And then oh yeah, my neighbor had it happen, this and that. And all of a sudden it turns into that we've been trying to design up for it or whatever to prevent it happening next time. And, we just kind of walk through it that way. But I guess we don't sit and say it as climate change per se directly.
Yeah, same here. Trying to talk to the value that your audience holds, whatever that may be. So, if you're talking to landowners who rent out their farmland and are maybe a little bit more liberal, perhaps, than some others, that you may be able to use that term and really talk directly about it. But I think a lot of it has been trying to talk more about the effects that we've been seeing on the ground the last several years, not attributing necessarily a phenomenon to that, but just not using the term, but just saying, we're seeing more flooding, we're seeing stronger rains, and talking about practices to really try to adapt to those situations, knowing that that's probably going to happen again. I mean, that's kind of, I think one thing people are starting to accept is that it's not just a once in a lifetime rainfall, like this is going to happen again. I think, making that point is probably as far as we really go to saying this is climate change that we're seeing. And also droughts too. And sharing those stories of the farmers, trying to share the story from the farmer's perspective of, how their practices, their no-till, their cover crops, or whatever, their soil health practices, they've seen how their farm has held up better compared to their neighbors, and those kind of stories told by the farmer, not solely by us, is one tactic we've been taking on all kinds of conservation topics. So it's just really kind of trying to feel out your audience and figuring out how to come from, what do they care about, and trying to speak to it from that perspective.
I was just going to add, I know we're running out of time, but I would say if you're going to, when you engage the conversation, the best example I can give you is we have just finished up a lake management plan for a natural lake that is a wide spot in the Fox River. A very deep lake, very wide spot, but there's no water control structure. And we were going through this lake management planning effort because the real driving force really wasn't water quality. It was when the county put on an emergency slow no wake order, and we had to determine an elevation. And then that was always controversial, and it's gotten way more controversial because it's always on, right? Because the lake's coming up with the flash floodiness. By the time it comes down, it's coming back up, and you can't wakeboard ever, right? And so it was a hard sell to get to the end of that project. But what we used is all the available data collection we could have, and we put a GPS or a GPS data collector, water elevation collector out there. When we finally laid it all out, all the doubters, they kind of had to believe it. They had to believe that something is changing. So that's my 2 cents.
All right. Well, thank you all so very much. This is going to conclude the questions and also the end of our first session. So if you have any more follow-up questions or feedback about the session, please feel free to email us and we will follow up with you. Again, thank you so much to Katie, Ken, and Kirk for their presentations. Coming up next in this room, starting at 2:20, so in 5 minutes, is the County Conservation across Wisconsin. So stick around in this Zoom room if you're planning to attend this session. In the other breakout room, room B, is the retrospective of the producer-led watershed program. So if you want to attend that session, you can find the Zoom link on the virtual agenda or see the chat box for the link to the virtual agenda at a glance. There's also a closed session for County Conservationists that will be giving updates with agency partners, and that's going to be happening in room C. So if you're a County Conservationist, go ahead and join that discussion, and you should have that link through your virtual agenda. Again, thank you all so much for attending this session, and I hope you have a safe, wonderful summer.